Envato, unlimited creative assets, all in one place. Have you ever wanted to create a realistic city scene in Blender but felt overwhelmed by all the details? Whether you're a graphic designer looking to move into 3D or a 3D designer looking to take your creations to the next level, you're in the right place. I'm Jonathan Lamb with Envato, and I'll show you step by step how to quickly build a stunning cinematic cityscape using Blender and KitBash3D assets from Envato. Using pre-made 3D assets, we'll start by carefully arranging them to create a realistic and visually striking scene. We'll also add lighting, fog, and some cool post-processing effects to make it look even more dynamic. So, ready to realize your dream of becoming a 3D creator? Let's go! This video is brought to you by Envato. Unlimited creative assets and the broadest range of categories, all in one place. Follow the link in the description and start creating now. Now, instead of modeling every building from scratch, we're going to use KitBash3D assets from Envato. These are professionally made modular assets that help you create large-scale environments quickly and are used by companies like Epic Games, Marvel, Netflix, and HBO to tell amazing stories. It saves a ton of time and looks absolutely amazing. Envato has partnered with KitBash3D, giving you unlimited downloads of 4 of their key kits. With these assets, we can easily create a realistic urban scene without spending hours modeling each building, adding details like street lights, signs, and even traffic lights for that extra touch of realism. Now, let's get these assets into Blender. First, head over to Envato and select 3D from the top menu. From there, scroll a bit down and we can click on the Explore Now button, which will take us to the KitBash3D site. Here we can have a look at all the available models and kits that we can download, such as city streets, Manhattan, city cars, and storefronts. So grab all the models that you want to use, and for this tutorial we'll be using a few skyscrapers and buildings from the Manhattan kit, as well as some streets and traffic lights that can be found under city streets. Once you've downloaded them, you'll have a folder with multiple files, including FBX and OBJ formats. Now all we have to do is head over to Blender and go to File, Import, OBJ or FBX, navigate to your KitBash3D folder and select the OBJ or FBX file, and then click Import. Some of these kits come with multiple objects when you import them, which you can see over on the right here. Now this will become an absolute nightmare when we start importing more buildings. So let's go ahead and organize things first by grouping all the assets that we brought in. So let's go ahead and select all of these. And then we're just going to press M on the keyboard and select New Collection. Type in the name of the building. So we're just going to type in Skyscraper F and then hit Create. And then you can see here over on the right that we've now got this nice neat folder that everything has been put into, including the camera and the cube here, which we can go ahead and delete by pressing X on the keyboard. Now this is going to help keep things organized in this outliner panel, where we can now collapse the group as we've done here and keep things nice and tidy. Use G on the keyboard to move your skyscraper around, and then we're just going to repeat the process for all the assets that you want to use. Now that we have our KitBash3D assets imported and organized, it's time to start building our city. Let's start with the main buildings. So I want this skyscraper C to be the main focal point of our image here. So our camera is going to go somewhere along this line here. So let's go ahead and build out the scene. Now you can see as I zoom out of the scene, everything sort of disappears. So let's go ahead and fix that first by pressing N on the keyboard to bring out these options here. And over in View, we want to add 1 0 to clip end here, like so. And then you can see straight away, Press N again. As I zoom out, it no longer clips, which makes it easier when we are zooming out and rearranging all of our buildings. Okay, so starting off with our skyscraper C, we're just going to leave it over there in the middle of our scene, and we're going to move this building here. Now what I'm doing is I'm clicking on the Z-axis here to go into a bird's eye view, and that just makes it easier to move the buildings along the plane, which means that, say for example, if I was to move it over here, it makes it very hard to move, because you can see here now that it's dipped below the sort of floor plane, or what we'd have as a floor there. So we really want to go ahead and press Control Z here and press Z here to move it along the plane there, like so. So I'm just going to place it along here, and then I'm going to move this building here, pressing G on the keyboard, and then moving it right next to it, just to sort of create a nice little diorama here, like that. So just to make things a little bit more interesting. Now, in order to make the building of the scene a little bit easier, let's go ahead and create a camera so that we can continuously move back and forth from our building the scene and then what our camera can see. So to do that, let's go ahead and press Shift A, and then we're going to scroll down here to where it says camera, and then you can see because we had the skyscraper F selected, it's gone inside our skyscraper F folder. So let's go ahead and open that up, select the camera, and I'm just going to drag it out and put it back into the scene collection here, just so that we can see where our camera is. And then I'm just going to go back into the Z axis and then drag our camera out here like that. And then what we can do from here is we can start building our scene, and then pressing the toggle to camera view, we can then go back to our camera view to see what our scene looks like. Now let's go ahead and create a good view for our camera. Now in order to do that, what I usually do is I press N on the keyboard, I click camera to view, and then when I move my mouse and I navigate through the scene, it navigates as if I am looking through the camera, which makes things a little bit more easy to find a view. Now let's go ahead and make the camera settings a little bit more interesting by heading over to the object data properties here whilst having the camera selected, and we're going to change a few things in this panel here. We're going to set the focal length here to about 20 millimeters for a wider field of view. Now a lower focal length like this exaggerates the perspective and makes the buildings look taller, as you can see here. Whereas if we were to increase the focal length, you can see that it just doesn't feel as epic. So let's go ahead and bring it back down to 20, and then bring our camera back in like so. Now we're sort of angling the camera up at our buildings here just to make it look as epic as possible. So from here, just navigate the camera until you find an angle which you want to use for your image. So now that we have our camera angle set up, let's go ahead and press N again and make sure to untick camera to view, then press N again. And this way, when we start to navigate around the scene, you can see that we've moved out of our camera view, so we can start placing our buildings again. And every time we want to check what our illustration looks like, just simply toggle back to camera view like that by clicking on this button here. So let's go ahead and continue building up our scene. So we're just going to press Z up here so we can look at how we're building our scene. And I'm just going to choose this building here and then press G on the keyboard to drag it out, And let's go ahead and move this just over here like so. So you can see I'm sort of creating this road here between the buildings, and hopefully that should make things look a little bit more interesting. You can see we've got our building there in our illustration. That's great. And then let's go ahead and press Z on the keyboard, or press Z on that widget there, and then let's go ahead and build out some more roads. So I'm just going to select this building here, just going to drag it out, and let's just put this one, in fact I'm just going to place this one here for now, and let's choose, in fact let's bring this, so just be careful to select the right building. Just going to build our second road just along here like that, just bringing it in a little bit closer so you can see that in our illustration as we toggle it into our camera view. Now toggling back and forth between building our scene and the camera can get a little bit tedious, so what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to bring the mouse icon over to the very top right of the viewport until you see that our mouse becomes a cross, and then we're just going to click and drag out a separate viewport here like so, and then click toggle to camera view. So now you can see we've constantly got our camera view in place like this, and that means we don't have to constantly switch back and forth between our views like so, and we can just easily see how our view looks like as we're building it. So let's go ahead and select this building, and this makes things much easier to see how we're affecting our illustration. Let's just bring it over here just so that it's peeking through the second building like so, and then let's go ahead and bring this building out here like that, just so that it's peeking through behind this building here, and you can see we've got a nice composition going through our illustration. So we've got some nice lines flowing through like that, some nice diagonal lines, and then from here I kind of like where this building is placed already, so let's just keep it where it is like that, so it's peeking through here, and this building is kind of alright where it is as well. I kind of like where it's peeking behind that building there, just creating these nice negative shapes for our sky here as well. So we've got a nice equal composition between our buildings and where the sky is going to be. And for this last building here, let's go ahead and just fill out some space over at the back here, just placing it around here just so that it fills up some more space over here like so. And for this building I want to bring this top, just make sure that I don't accidentally select the camera, because the camera is right here as you can see. So if you accidentally select the camera and start moving it around, you'll see that it ruins our composition. So I'm just going to zoom in here, select these two buildings here, being careful not to select the camera. I just want to move this building so that I can see the top there, and then just sort of tweaking our composition ever so slightly like so. It's just to make things more interesting. So you can continue to move the buildings around like that whilst looking at your illustration, and you can see I've also imported some lamps and traffic lights in our project as well. So I'm just going to bring those back in, and you can see how that makes our illustration and gives it a little bit more of a sense of scale as well. So you can go ahead and zoom in here, select the traffic lights, and also go to the bird's eye view and move those around as well, just to try and find a nice angle for the illustration. You can see, you can zoom in here and you can see what that is looking like for our image. So now that our city is blocked out and the camera is set up, it's time to make everything look more realistic by adding things like reflective surfaces for our windows. Now for this next part, I've gone ahead and hidden all the other assets here. We're just going to be focusing on one skyscraper at a time, as once we start going into the other viewport shading modes, the textures might get a little bit intense and it might slow your computer down. So let's go ahead and just do one thing at a time. So I'm just going to focus on skyscraper C here. And then we're just going to go ahead and go over to the material properties panel. And then let's go to our material preview mode here, just so that we can see what our materials look like. And then from here, what we want to do is we want to go through the objects here, and we're going to look at all of these materials that each of these objects have. And we want to go ahead and look for something that is associated with windows or reflection. So it might be easier if we go ahead and select the model here in our viewport. Let's go ahead and try this glass cyan material here. And then hopefully, here you go. As you can see, once we changed the color, you should see it change in the viewport here as well. So once we've done that, let's go ahead and reduce the roughness here to a value between 0 and 0.2 so that it's fully reflective. And then we want to adjust the IOR to 1.5 for more realistic looking reflections. And you can sort of see how that's affected the material here as we rotate in our viewport. Cool. So repeat this step for all of the other buildings here and make sure that they have nice reflective window textures. Now that our city has realistic textures, it's time to bring it to life with lighting. Lighting is one of the most important parts of creating a cinematic scene. It sets the mood, adds depth, and makes everything feel more realistic. First, let's make sure that we're using the right render engine. In the render panel here, let's go ahead and change the render engine here from Eevee to Cycles, and then change the device from CPU to GPU compute so that it runs faster if you have a good graphics card. Next, we're going to go ahead and check the denoise option to make sure that our image looks clearer in the viewport, and then change the max viewport samples to 128 and max samples for the render to 256. We'll use a HDRI, a high dynamic range image, to create the natural lighting and realistic reflections. So you can get free HDRI images from sites like Polyhaven, where you can search for things like skies or city images. So this one for Canary Wharf looks like it could work quite well too. And the best thing about these is that they'll also work on your window reflections. So first of all, let's go ahead and change to our shading workspace here by clicking on the top shading tab here. And then we're also going to change to our rendered preview mode by clicking on this circle here. So we've moved from the material preview to the rendered view. And you can see as we've done that, our scene is a lot darker, and that's because we have no lights. So we're going to change that by adding a HDRI image. So press Shift A, and then we're going to search image, and we're going to add an image texture here. And then what we're going to do is just click open here and find the HDRI image that we downloaded from Polyhaven. And you can see I've already opened it on this tab here. So just going to simply connect the color node here like so. And you can see straight away it's lit up our scene. And we can have more control over the way our sky looks by adding some other nodes. So let's go ahead and add a mapping node here, and then also a texture coordinate, like so. And then we're going to connect generated to vector, and then vector to vector, like so. And then from here, you can go ahead and change things like the rotation of your sky. So we can rotate it in the X, the Y, and the Z, like so. We can also change the scale, so how big or small it is, and also the location. So for this image here, I'm just going to reset this, and then we're just going to rotate it by 88.3 here. So I like the way the sky is looking, and you can see as we rotate it how it sort of changes the lighting of our scene as well, and how the sunlight, the light of the sky, is sort of bouncing and affecting our buildings and where the shadows are being placed on our image. So let's go ahead and change it to 88.3 here, as that's where I like this. The sunlight is moving from the top left and just sort of hitting the top of our buildings here, and then just sort of casts a nice shadow over on the right. You can see we can also increase the strength of the background here to increase or decrease how bright our lighting is as well. Now with our HDRI up and running, we can now start to add some extra lights around the scene to really make our buildings pop. First, let's make sure we're in display render preview so that we can see in real time how our lighting is affecting the scene. So let's go ahead and press Shift A, and we're going to add a light. So let's try and find light here, and we're going to add an area light. So you can see that the area light is in our scene collection here, and we're just going to press, let's go to Y, press G to bring it up like so, and then we're going to press S to scale, and we're just going to scale it up like that so we can see it in our scene. And what we want to do is we just want to continue just sort of rotating it around our building so that we can see how it is affecting it. Now it's not really affecting it at the moment, and that's because the power is a little bit too low. So let's bring this power up to something like 10,000, and you can see hopefully how that's affecting our building. So I'm just going to rotate it up here like that, and let's go ahead and bring it down, and maybe let's bring this up to 6,000. Hopefully, yes, now you can see how that's starting to affect our building. So we can switch it on and off like that, and you can see that with that on, we've got a little bit more light, a little bit more sunlight for our building here. So I'm just going to toggle to camera view here, and let's make the color of our light just a little bit warmer like that, and then just sort of repeat the same steps for all the other buildings. So here you can see that I've added all these lights for all the other skyscrapers, as if the sunlight is hitting the top of these skyscrapers, making the top parts of the buildings really hot and white. So you can see all these squares here that I've added to the scene to represent the sunlight. And then we've also gone ahead and put all of the lights into one group like so. So you can easily see, if I switch the lights off, how our scene looks without our lights and with them. And I've switched off some of these buildings here just to make sure that the scene runs a little bit smoother as we go along the tutorial. To make the city feel more immersive, we'll add some haze. This helps create depth, soften distant objects, and enhances the light rays for a dramatic effect. And let's just go back to our viewport shading mode for now, just so that things run a little bit smoother. We're going to go out of our camera view, and let's go ahead and add some of these buildings back into our scene so that we can see where how big our scene is. And you can see from here how I've included each of these lights and where they're pointing on the top of these buildings. So each of these area lights here, we've got one for this building, one for that building, and how they're all sort of angled towards the top part of the buildings, of the skyscrapers, just to make them look a little bit hotter for the illustration. Now, for the purpose of creating a fog, what we want to do is we want to go and have a cube into our scene. So Shift A, and let's add a cube here, and we're going to rename this fog, and then we're going to scale this up. So press S to scale it up, and we want to cover the whole of our scene here. So I'm just going to scale this in the Z, and press G and Z to bring it up. Press S, G and Z, and we just want to go ahead and cover all of our buildings here. So S and X, G and X, and then once all of our buildings are sort of covered with this cube, we can move on to the next stage. So let's open up the shader editor here. And from here, what we want to do is make sure that the fog is selected. And then we're going to go to the material properties here, and we want to create a new material. So click on the plus icon here, click on new, and we're just going to rename this material fog. And then once we've done that, we want to change it from principled BSDF to, let's go ahead and find principled volume. So now we've got principled volume here, and you can see that's changed in our nodes here as well. And then in the shader editor, let's go ahead and select from the volume, and we want to change it from surface to volume, like that. So make sure the volume is connected to volume. And then from here, it's all about adjusting the values of the principled volume node to get the right look that we want. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and switch from viewport shading to our rendered view here. Now, heading over to our shading workspace here, we're going to make sure that we are still viewing the rendered preview, and we're going to select our fog cube here, and we're going to add a new material for it. So make sure that we're in the material properties, click on the add new material, click on new, and we're going to rename this fog, and then we're going to change it from principled BSDF to principled volume, which will then reflect over here where our nodes are. And then from here, in order for our fog to really take shape, we're going to change the node from volume to volume, make sure that these two volumes are connected. And then we're going to change the density. So currently now we can't see anything because the density is set to 1. So we're going to set this to something like 0.002 for a light subtle haze. So higher values, as you saw before, will make the haze look a lot thicker, but lower values like 0.002 will make it a lot lighter. And then we're going to change the anisotropy to something between 0.3 and 0.5, which will give it a nice haze and help create nice sunbeams if your lighting allows for it. And then we can change the emission strength here, like so, to add a smog effect or a sort of sunset vibe. So let's go ahead and change this to 0.001 and see what that looks like, or even lighter, so 0.0001. And we can also change the color as well, just to give it a little bit of a warmer color, like that. Cool. And then once you're happy with the way that the fog looks, re-add all of your buildings in, if your computer allows for it, to see what the image looks like. Now you can see as you start to add the buildings back in, how the fog and the haze really helps add a layer of depth to our image. So the further the buildings are away from the camera, the lighter that they seem. We've built our city, added realistic textures, and created a dynamic lighting setup. Now, let's take it to the next level with some final touches. These small details like lens flares, color grading, and post-processing can make a huge difference in bringing out that cinematic feel. First, we need some transparent PNG overlays. Head over to Envato and search for lens flare PNG, or dust texture overlay. Back in Blender, let's go ahead and add a plane. So we're going to press Shift A, Mesh, and Plane. So you can see we focused on our plane there. And we're just going to move it out of the way and press the dot key on our numpad again to focus in on our plane. And we're just going to scale it up a little bit. And we want to move it to where the position of our camera is. So let's go ahead and select the plane and then select the camera, making sure the camera has been selected last so that it is our main focus object. And then we're going to press Ctrl C and then select location so that the plane is now at the same location as our camera, and then press Ctrl C again. And this time we're going to select copy rotation. And now you can see if we focus in on our camera and our plane, it's at the same rotation and same position as our camera. So let's unselect both of these. Select just our plane, press G and then Z, and then just move it slightly in front of our camera like so, and then scale it down. Cool. Now let's go ahead and go to our shading panel here. And then with the plane selected, make sure that we're using the material properties here. And we're going to give it a new material. So add a new material slot, add a new material. And we're just going to rename this something like flares, like so. Now, we currently can't see anything in our camera view because we've got that plane in front of it. So we're going to add a texture to our plane. So first of all, let's go ahead and remove this principled BSDF. And we're going to press Alt A to add an image texture, like so. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and open up our lens flare or dust PNG file. So navigate to where you downloaded the lens flares or dust PNGs from Envato. Select the one that you want to use and open the image. Cool. Once you've done that, we're going to add a few more nodes. So let's go ahead and press Alt A, and then we're going to add an emission shader here. And then we're going to press Alt A, and then we're going to add an add shader. Let's zoom in here. And then lastly, we're going to press Alt A, and then we're going to add a transparent BSDF. And then hook that up there. And then finally, from shader, we want to put that to surface. Excellent. And then once we've done that, make sure that we're actually in the rendered preview mode to see what it looks like. And what we're going to do from here is we're actually going to go ahead and go back to our layout mode or our double view. Now, if you don't have a double view like this, remember we can always add a new viewport by clicking and dragging it out from the top right hand corner, as we did at the beginning of the lesson, like so. So now we've got one view on the right for our camera and one view on the left for our viewport, as we had before. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and move our plane. So press G and then Y to move our lens flare up, maybe scale it down a little bit, and then press GXX and then move it over to the left, and that's how we can go ahead and change where our lens flare is. So we can even move it further away from the camera or closer to the camera. And then once you've repositioned your lens flare to where you want it, back in the shading workspace, we can go back to the emission node here and then increase the strength of our lens flare or decrease it to where we like it. Repeat the steps for the dust to complete the look. The last thing we want to do before rendering our image is going to the Render Properties tab and scrolling all the way down to Color Management. Here we can change a few more things. Let's go over to the view, and we want to change this from standard to filmic. And then for the look, we can change it to something like high contrast or even very high contrast. And we can also play about with the exposure and the gamma as well. Now, the next thing that we want to have a look at is also the curves. So we can check use curves here, and you can see how that immediately changes the way this looks. And that's because I've already set some presets here. So you can change how it looks by moving the curves up and down here. So I'm just going to increase the darker values and increase the lighter values here. And then going over to the blue channel, I've just increased part of the blue channel here, like so, just to give it a slightly blue hue, like so. And then once you're happy with the way it looks, it's time to render the final image. Head over to the rendering tab, and then from here, we're just going to make sure that you're happy with the final resolution of your image. So let's go over to the output here, and you can see that we've set the values to 1920 by 1080. But if you want to render a larger image, keep in mind that it will take a little bit longer to render your final image. Then we're going to choose the file format, so you can change this to PNG or JPEG. Choose the destination for your image, and then once you've done that, all you have to do is go over and click on the render button, or F12 on the keyboard. Once it's done, go to Image, Save As, and save your masterpiece. And that's it! We've taken our cityscape from a simple block out using KitBash assets to a fully detailed cinematic render. Now it's your turn. Try different lighting setups, play about with camera angles, and experiment with different textures to make the scene truly your own. Thanks for watching, and happy blending!